Welcome to this episode of Trojan Poetry. This week we're back with a poem called House is an Enigma by Emma Bolden. This is one that I picked. John hasn't read it yet, and here we go. House is not a metaphor. House has nothing to do with beak or wing. House is not two hands held angled towards each other. House is not its roof or the pine straw on its roof. At night, its windows and doors look nothing like a face. Its stairs are not vertebrae. Its walls may be white, they are not pale skin. House does not appreciate your pun on its panes as pains. House does not appreciate because House does not have feelings. House has no aesthetic program. House does what it does, which is not doing. House does not sit on its foundations. House exists in its foundations. And when the wind pushes itself to full gale, House is never the one crying. From the silence, I can tell John is taking it in.
Oh boy, okay.
House is an enigma, John. Did you read the title?
I hope people appreciate how hard it is to publicly embarrass yourself weekly when you don't understand a text.
Right, by not knowing what's going on. But this is what we're trying to do.
Yes.
It's real.
We're
it's
trying
raw,
to admit
it's poetry.
show the confusion often faced by people. Yes. All right.
We're basically what we're trying to do is outdo each other with poems that we can find to have the other one just sit quietly after after you read it.
Well, I know what a house isn't.
Okay. All right. So house is not. I thought that was interesting. All the negatives.
Yeah.
House is not this. House is not that. But then it kind of seems like the speaker was thinking those things and then is in denial, right? Like house does not look like a face at night. The stairs are not vertebrae. It does not have skin.
Well, yeah, because there's the weird thing where it's mixing like building type materials with human or skin or animal type materials, right? Beak, wing, vertebrae, skin. Mm-hmm. But then you've got the pine straw roof and the walls and the window panes, which are actually connected to emotions there. So it's kind of like what it's not, what it's not, what it's not. But then at the very end, it seems like the dagger is House is never the one crying. Well, someone's crying. Mm-hmm. That implies that someone is crying. Mm-hmm. So that the it's not even really about the house, right? How the house isn't what this poem's about. It's about
those last few words.
Yeah, right? I mean...
Yeah, no, I agree. When I read this at first, it was just very... It was almost like a computer had typed this, because there's not even a the in front of it. The house is not the house, right? It's just house. House is like its own... It's a person, almost. It's a concrete noun, but they're not... But it's not a thing. Right. And then the other thing for me that jumped out was house does not sit on its foundations. It exists in its foundations. Yeah. And I'm still struggling with what the difference of that would be, I guess. Yeah. It's not sitting because it's not a thing. It just is. It just exists, right? And like you said, if the poem is really about the person crying, is house a comfort to the person who is crying because they're spending so much time describing it?
Because the house does not appreciate your pun on its pains as pain. Like, the house is a non-entity, right? It's a blank.
Yeah.
It does not appreciate. It doesn't have sympathy, I don't think. Mm-hmm. But it's surrounding you, the person that's crying. Like, you are surrounded by something that doesn't care. Oh, that's pretty dark.
Well, maybe the speaker is looking for some human interaction because of all those, right? Maybe the speaker wants it to look like a face and to have skin and vertebrae, like a person there to comfort them.
And somebody's saying no.
Yeah, but house doesn't care. House is just there. So there is no one there to comfort you because, oh, God.
No, but I live on a corner. I often end up talking about my life, apparently, in these. I live on a corner lot, and the wind is ferocious. Sometimes, right, it feels like the house, because we're across from a field, and the wind comes, right and hits our house right by my bedroom wall.
Yeah.
And so we get the full gale force of the wind, and I'm not usually crying when
Well, you can tell us, John.
I'm not. But that's, so I can imagine perfectly the wind pushing itself to full gale.
You hear that whistling kind of.
Yeah, and the siding starts kind of
banging
rattling,
sound.
or
My son has a tree outside his window, and I haven't trimmed it enough. It scratches, and it used to really scare him.
like in the movie Poltergeist.
Yeah, well, he would, because we couldn't figure out what it was at first, and it's just that creepy nails on a chalkboard sound. And finally, I realized I had to trim the tree, but it was that same kind of thing. It's something from outside is going on, but you're inside.
You're in a house, but the house
does not help you at all.
isn't.
Not the house. House.
Yeah, house.
House.
Oh,
is
this
not.
about that TV show House? I've never watched it, but because he's a doctor. Right?
Yeah, right. The British guy who pretends like he's not British.
I don't know.
Is that right? Okay.
I don't know.
But yeah, I agree with you. That's one thing that, the title of the poem, House, is an enigma. The poem is an enigma.
Right.
Because the poem, what's most important to the speaker, I would think, are those last words. House is never the one crying. So it's almost like the speaker is avoiding, by looking at house and describing it, he or she is avoiding the most important thing, right? Or they're trying to avoid dealing with their own emotions,
but it's almost like a condemning, like it's not like that you're crying and somebody, that whoever this is saying no, the house isn't these things. It's not going to
help you
comfort. It's not, or so
shame on you, house.
And what a strange, I don't know, what a strange thing to want to say, I guess. If we could be wrong, of course, but
well, home is where the heart is, right? I mean,
no.
No, it's not. Well, no, I think that's, usually you would think of your
home is
where you live is
yeah.
that's your place to go for comfort and you can relax and all those things.
But that's home, that's not house.
Right?
Yes.
So this is a cold, stark place where this person is dealing or not dealing with their emotions, and they feel like they're missing something almost. So, yeah, I just thought this was it has just stood out to me just because it is an enigma and it was such a strange way of describing something. So, all
right.
Yeah. So, where do you live? How do you feel about your house? I guess would be my question. Is your house an enigma, or I guess the other question I'd ask is when you're dealing with something. Do you avoid it by looking around you and trying to distract yourself, or do you deal with it head on? Is there a right or wrong way to do something like that? I think that kind of ties in with what the poem is asking.
All right.
And John, you had a book recommendation.
Well, so we had a book recommendation. I was going to recommend this book. I'll do that later, though, because I didn't know this was the poem we were doing. So excuse me for one moment.
He's going off camera.
All right. So it just so happens that
he has a whole bag of books to recommend.
A whole bag of books
so this will be another about 35-minute episode.
All right. House of Leaves. I just happen to literally just.
You always have it with
there.
you.
Yeah. But if you haven't read House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danilewski,
you got to hold the poem down.
Definitely a recommendation, and it actually has poetry in it. And the poetry is kind of in the appendix or one of the appendices, and it plays a part in one of the characters' lives. So, highly recommended this book, which is strangely enough very much like this poem.
Yeah, it does. It does fit. I would back this recommendation. It took me a long time to read it. I borrowed it from John, and it's a lot to absorb. I guess I would say it's a horror book, but if you try to describe it that way too.
Like a postmodern horror novel.
Yeah, there's poetry, there's crazy page breaks, there's all kinds of footnotes and references. And
maybe we'll put some pictures in.
It's an amazing book, yeah.
All right, well, so that's our recommendation for this week. Thanks for watching. Please join the conversation in the comments on YouTube or on Twitter at Trojan Poetry DGN. Also check out our website at trojanpoetrydgn.blogspot.com.